Hi, and welcome back to another little video about what goes on in the environment. Now, we've already seen how energy moves through the environment, but we should remember that all living things are made of the particles, these atoms. And so to build themselves up and to grow, they need to get some more atoms in their body too. So not only does food provide the energy that we need to do things, it also gives us the atoms, or the building blocks, we need to keep growing. So let's have a bit of a look at that and see what goes on. Right, when we do things, as we saw in metabolism, we saw how when things are metabolizing, they're using it to grow, to build new cells or repair new or old cells and fix themselves up with it and work from there. Now, these points are quite good, but we need the atoms to actually do it. It would be slightly different if we were an organism that relied upon energy only. So that would mean our energy would be our body. So we wouldn't exist in the form we do. So these things are really, really important. It's very important for us to keep taking in new bits of matter, or new atoms, or particles, or molecules, whatever you want to call them, so we can do our growing, building and repairing. Now, in normal stages, now I'm going to concentrate more about humans here at the moment, and we can transpose that whole idea to what animals do as well. Now, we take in a lot of protein. Most of the protein we take in comes in the form of meat or animal products. All right. Vegetarians take in protein too, and we can take in protein in things like soybean, tofu, various other combinations of things. It just seems to be that the protein is a little bit more concentrated in some of these forms here. We also take in energy producers, actually the biggest energy producer in the whole lot. We tend to use these things in our bodies, and that's what we store them as, fats and oils, to be our energy supply. But carbohydrates are also good energy sources, as are proteins. And as we're going to find out, they all have similar makeup in terms of the atoms that are present, or rather the elements that are present. If we go into our carbohydrate group, and over here we've got carbohydrates, that's things like pies and pasta and grain and bread and biscuits and things like that. Anything that's made from, these tend to be a lot more plant produced over here. And in the middle, we've got the fats and oils and lipids as we do. Now these are very, very important, especially when we're making new body cells. It actually forms the outside of the cell, or the cell membrane. A lot of that comes from lipid and protein combined things. Now we can see here we get fats in animal fats like omega fats in fish, which is supposed to be not only good for your body but good for your brain as well. Of course, avocado is good, coconut, nuts of all varieties, olives, and we can see the variations of over here of just some of the liquid form. We tend to take the liquid, the lipid and fats in there. So often people and animals of this world are called carbon-based life form. And the reason is that, as you can see, here on this little table I've put some of the more common elements we find in us, and where we have them, or where they come from, and what we need it for. And here is how much we have in terms of mass. So most of it we can see is in the form of an oxygen or other, but carbon is quite high. Now it's very interesting that the elements that group together to make carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. The elements that group together to make fats tend to be carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. For our proteins, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and nitrogen. And that'll become a little bit more obvious as we go through. happens with this, with all things, we saw how energy and water in particular circled through the environment. Now we can see that carbon also does, so the atoms of carbon move around the environment. They go from being in the air to in the bodies of living things, right, to being stored as what we would call fossil fuels. I'll just put that one in because I think it's important for us to remember this. This is our fossil fuels. Things like coal and oil shale and natural gas. And over here they're being used to produce energy. We use the energy because they've got energy stored in their bonds. So it goes into here and our energy stores in this, and so we burn fossil fuels to release it. Now of course that means more carbon dioxide in the air. We would like you to be thinking about this because it is so topical at the moment, the whole idea of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and us burning fossil fuels linked to our changing climate. So maybe it's best for us to remember this on the way through. Now this cycle is a natural cycle. It just occurs normally. But we also, well, factories aren't natural, as we know, so this part is man-made, or rather human impact, and the rest of it happens normally. As you go through, you might like to find out how carbon dioxide is affecting the oceans and the waterways of the world, as well as the air. You might think about those things. But as we can see, this simply shows us how carbon atoms are recycled and move through the environment. We haven't talked about biomass would include us, living things. Now sometimes the living things get trapped, and that is the fossil fuel business. They get buried and the energy cannot be released, so it stays here. Right, so obviously if we've done that with carbon, we saw that hydrogen and oxygen, and if we think about it, hydrogen and oxygen form that wonderful thing called water, and we've already seen how the water recycles. The other element, of course, is nitrogen. Now, nitrogen, as we know, is a major thing. It's about 80% of the air. So there's quite a lot of it around, but it's not much use to us in the air. But it is very, very useful because it's used in making protein, and protein makes your muscle, right? So all the things in your body that are made of muscle, the protein is there to help us. So in this case, the nitrogen is able to move around from the air. We need it to get into the living things. Now we can do that by, believe it or not, thunderstorms helps it out a lot, and that causes that to become a chemical that goes into the roots of the plants, and from there it becomes a plant protein, and then we ingest plant protein and it becomes animal, it becomes part of us. And we can see that flow here. So it comes into an animal, and of course if we eat this cow, then we would take in its proteins and its fats and oils and everything else that's in there as well. But in the space of everything else, as we know, animals die and plants die, and so they return their organic matter. That means all of the stuff that they are part of them, all of the cells or all the chemicals inside them are then returned to the soil, and the cycle continues. But we often find a lot of the chemicals also go back. Our big problem with nitrogen is it goes back into the air, and so that means the living part of the atmosphere, the living part of the environment, can't get access to it. There are very few organisms or living things in the environment that are able to take nitrogen directly from the air. One of them, it's down here, it's called nitrification. There are certain types of plants which we call a legume. and that's like a pea and a bean, and they are able to do it. They are able to do it, and they are able to increase the nitrogen in and out of the soil so other plants can do it. So that's how nitrogen is recycled. So as you can see, not only is it important for the energy to be moving around the environment, but it's also important for the matter, especially the certain types of atoms that I've talked about, to be able to do the same thing.